Hi,
Hello. Here we are. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are
Thank
you?
you. I'm great. Thank you. Well, lovely. Thanks for joining us. All right. So I'm just going to hop on here and do some a little introductions. So I think we have all of our classes here in place. So I just want to welcome everyone and thank you so much for being here this morning. I want to welcome the campuses of St. Andrew and St. Anne and St. Augustine. And of course, welcome our guest speaker, Ms. Deborah Oppenheimer, producer of the documentary film that you all have now had an opportunity to see, which is great. And I want to just take a couple moments for our classes for them to understand why we're taking the time to do this today. Only 19 states, guys, in the whole country require that the Holocaust is taught in schools. And I know that some of you have finished your units on World War II, and some of you are going to be getting to it before the end of the school year. But the Holocaust is an enormous part of that education and part of any education. And it's important to us here at the Catholic Academy of Bridgeport, because not only do we want to remember and honor the victims of that atrocity, but in that remembering, we want to ensure that nothing like it ever happens again. And with awareness comes accountability. And so each of you, through your education, is being charged with being a force for good in this world, right? And you know from your mission statements that you say every day at the end of the day that you have an obligation to make this world a better place now for people that are marginalized, but also for making it better in generations to come. And education is the best way to do that. And education happens in lots of different ways, and especially the arts. Film and television in particular have a unique way of combining images and music and words and thoughts to evoke emotion and connect people in powerful ways, sometimes more powerful than I'm sure you would agree than just reading from a book. And when it comes to something as important as the Holocaust, personal connections are really important, because as time goes by, we run the danger of thinking that this happened a long time ago and maybe it's not as relevant to us anymore. And there's a real danger in that kind of thinking. So being able to hear the testimonies like you heard in this documentary from the people that experienced it is really important, so that we can remember that these are not just stories in a textbook. These are real human people who had these experiences, had their lives altered, not just at the hands of aggressors, but at the hands of people who stood by and did nothing. So I hope that when you watch this documentary, you felt what I felt, which is that we can never, ever be silent in the face of injustice, whether it's happening in our classrooms or in our neighborhoods or in the world, okay? So I want to share with you that already this incredible documentary has had an amazing impact, and it's already had some wonderful awards and achievements. Ms. Oppenheimer was inspired to make the film, as you might already know, as she explored her mother's childhood experience on the Kindertransport. And in that exploration was born this film. And it won the 2000 Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. So you know about the Oscars. That's the highest achievement that a film can receive in the United States. But it was also selected by the Library of Congress for inclusion in the National Film Registry. And that means that it was deemed culturally, historically, and aesthetically relevant enough to be preserved permanently, so that citizens 100 years from now will be able to see this film and appreciate it and access it. And also, in recognition of her work, the White House appointed Ms. Oppenheimer twice to the Governing Council on the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. So this film's had a very, very big historical and cultural impact. So I want to get to the introductions now and make sure that you all have an opportunity to meet each other. So Ms. Oppenheimer is a parent. She has a son named Patrick, who I believe, if I read correctly, he's a Marine Corps veteran. Is that right?
Yes.
Among other wonderful things, I'm sure. So that's something to be very proud of. And you know that Ms. Oppenheimer's profession is that she's a film and television producer and executive producer. She's, of course, produced Into the Arms of Strangers, which you've all seen. She also produced another documentary film called Foster in 2018, which explored the foster care system in Los Angeles. And then, of course, she's a film and television producer. She's a producer and executive director of many different domestic and international cable and network TV shows. So everything from sitcoms to dramas and everything in between. She's had the experience of helping to create and bring to the screen. And something that I really love to share with all of you, because this is something that I hope to impart to you through your education, is that no matter how busy you are, no matter how big your job may be, it's very important to always be able to give back to your community. And Ms. Oppenheimer does that through volunteering at the Children's Hospital in LA. And she's been a special education tutor, and she's been an English as a second language teacher in the Los Angeles Unified School District. So a wonderful example of the importance of always giving back to your community, right? And so, Ms. Oppenheimer, I'd like to introduce you to our wonderful classes. You guys can wave when you hear your names. At St. Andrew Academy, we have Mr. Williams' class. There they are. And at St. Anne Academy, we have Ms. LeCarey's class. And at St. Augustine Academy, we have two wonderful 8th grade classes led by Ms. Lee and Ms. Hyder. All right, so now that we've had a chance to all be introduced to each other, I am going to go ahead and hand it over to Ms. Oppenheimer, who you have actually come here to see. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment so we can see each other's faces a little bigger, and I'll throw it to you.
Hi, Angela. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. This is so meaningful to me, and I want to thank the Catholic Academy of Bridgeport and to St. Anne Academy, St. Andrew Academy, and St. Augustine Academy. Thank you for including me and inviting me into your program, which I'm really glad you're studying. And the reason for that is because I made this film because I wanted people to know about the Kindertransport, which began 83 years ago. So the students here who are on this Zoom are of the age who could have been rescued by the Kindertransport. So I find that really powerful. My mother was the one to have inspired the film. She was rescued by the Kindertransport, and she would never talk about it. She'd never talk about her childhood. I never found one person who she spoke about it to, not my father, not her best friends, certainly not to my brother or sister or me. And so we never knew anything about it. I think if you want, you can show some pictures of my mother and me, Angela. Yep. So this is my mother and me. Her lipstick matches my little romper. And there's another picture, a couple of pictures of us. This was us outside the elementary school that my big brother was going to. And here's one more of us in matching bonnets. My grandparents, my mother's parents, were named Avram and Alta Bazia Avramovitsi, and they put my mother on a train immediately following her 11th birthday. She stayed in Germany long enough to have a birthday celebration. This is her, and this is the birthday present she received for her 11th birthday. It's a very typical gift that might have been given in Germany, even down to the color red of this leather pen and pencil set. And those are what are called Mont Blanc pen and pencils, which today are a big deal if you were to buy them in a store. And I still have that. It's right here by my side. And it means a great deal to me because my mother brought it on the train with her and kept it for all these years. So you can see how meaningful it was. My mother fully expected to be reunited with her parents. And that's how the parents got their children on their train. And my mother never saw her parents again. And we can go to some pictures of them, a picture of them now. This was my grandmother and my grandfather. And because I never had them in my life, we never had to come up with what I would call them. In German, it would have been Oma and Opa. It might have been, it could have been anything, Granny, Grandpa. I never had to learn that because I never had them in my life. They were deported from my mother's birthplace of Chemnitz, Germany, sorry, to Lublin, Poland in May of 1942. And they were killed upon arrival at an extermination camp called Belzec, which was particularly bad. camp. It wasn't just a concentration camp, it was an extermination camp, and only 2 people survived it. My mother told, I think we can go back to, we can lose that now.
Okay.
And just go back to the screen. My mother told me 3 things when I was growing up. She told me that she lived with a lord and lady in a castle, although I did not get the impression that that was the fairy tale that it might sound like. She told me she cried herself to sleep every night for 2 years, which was very disturbing as a child to hear. And she told me that at the end of the war, she searched the posted lists of the survivors to see if she could find her parents' names, but she never did. And so it was really the absence of information that provided the confirmation that she no longer had her parents. I never heard about the kinder transport outside my home. I never learned about it in school. I never discussed it with my friends. I never discussed it with any of my boyfriends. We never spoke about it, not to my siblings either. And at the age of 62, my mother was diagnosed with lung cancer. And then I knew time was short and that there were stories that I was going to lose. And so I wanted to ask my mother questions, but I didn't know what to ask her. And I would try to ask her, but she would start crying and I would start crying, and I retreated for fear of actually doing harm to my mother, that I might open a box that I could not close back up again. She passed away at the age of 65 in 1993. And we had been very shielded from death, even to the point of being told that the family dog, Skippy, was away on a farm living with a nice family. So I took it very hard when I lost my mother. Not that I wouldn't have taken it hard anyway. And in the aftermath of her passing, my father came to me one day with a stack of letters. They were these tissue thin letters with beautiful fountain pen writing. And he said, well, you're sentimental. You might want these. And I did want them because it turned out that they were letters that my grandparents had written to my mother every day in the first weeks after her departure. My father didn't know those letters existed. None of us did. And I learned from those letters that she left after the first week of August 1939. The kinder transport ended on September 1st when World War II broke out. So just a couple of weeks later, my mother would not have been rescued and I would not be here speaking to you. On those letters, in addition to the postmarks, were also the addresses of where those letters were being sent. And they were sent to Hackney Hostel, which was a group home, an old Victorian house where a lot of kids were taken in. And then another place called Cockley Clay, which I quickly figured out was the name of the castle. When I first started my search, which was not a documentary initially, I wanted to know what happened to my mother, my grandparents, and what the kinder transport was. And I would call around and I would say to people, I'd like to talk to you about the kinder transport. And they would say, kidney transplant? I mean, the word was so unknown at the time, and the information was so meager. And this was before the expansion of the internet, that it filled half a page, half a typewritten page of references. It was not even in the Encyclopedia Judaica. And then one day, while I was still just conducting my research and my search, I was invited to a dinner by a girlfriend of mine where her father-in-law, her husband's father, was being honored. And the Prime Minister of Great Britain at the time, Margaret Thatcher, was there to present him with a plaque. And at this dinner, they showed archival footage, black and white archival footage, like you saw in the film, of the kinder transport. There's not a lot of kinder transport footage, but what there was, they were showing some of it at this dinner. And I was searching this footage thinking, was my mother captured in the footage? Would I recognize her? Is she in it? And then they asked all the people who were on the kinder transport to stand. And 3 tables of silver and gray-haired seniors stood up, and you could have knocked me over. I was absolutely in shock. And I realized they exist, they know each other, they speak to each other. And I came home, and the next day I came into the office and I said to my assistant, maybe we're missing the most elementary thing. Why don't we look up K in the telephone book, which at that time was used more than is used now. And sure enough, we found the name of a guy named, a man named Eddie Nussbaum, who lived not far from me and was the president of the Southern California chapter of the Kindertransport Association of America. And I called him, and he invited me over, and I was there within days. And I brought him cookies. And when I showed up, he had a table full of things to give me. He had a book by a woman named Bertha Leverton, who wound up being in our movie. And it was a book of collected stories called I Came Alone. And it was the first time I would be able to read autobiographical thumbnails, not long entries, but stories by many, many, many Kindertransport survivors. He also gave me the name of a woman named Amy Gottlieb, who was a historian in London, who was walking down the street one day and found files and records thrown in the garbage pail of a trash bin of Kindertransport records. And she rescued them out of the trash, realized their importance. And I eventually called her or wrote to her. I think I wrote to her. And 5 a.m, she didn't make the translation of the time difference between England and Los Angeles. And she woke me at 5 a.m. to tell me she had my mother's file. There were only a couple of pages in it. It wasn't a lot of information, but I think when information is so meager, anything you have takes on great, great meaning. And she gave me, Eddie gave me the application to the 60th anniversary reunion of Kindertransport survivors that was going to be taking place in 9 months in London. And I thought, well, that's a meaningful deadline. That could be something I could meet, and maybe I'm meant to be there with the camera. Maybe I should be documenting it. So I eventually filled out the application. Eddie was, as you can hear, very generous with me, but very tough with me, wanting to know, where was your mother from? And where did she go to school? And lots and lots of questions. And I wasn't able to answer all of them. And it was painful to me that I couldn't answer all of them. So when I came home and filled out this application, which was geared toward the survivor, it would have been geared toward my mother. I filled it out as best I can. By now I had the letters, so I could say the date that she had come to England, or the approximate date of August 1939. I could list Hackney Hostel, and I could list Cockley Clay as 2 of her residences. And I attached a letter explaining that I regretted that I didn't know more, but we respected our mother's grief-stricken wishes not to discuss the past. And I sent it off to the post office that was listed on this application. And the final thing that Eddie did was he gave me the name of a man named Kurt Goldberger. Kurt Goldberger was the president of the American group, the Kindertransport Association of America. And it turned out that he only lived 20 minutes, half an hour from my mother. And I thought, gee, if only my mother knew him or knew of him, maybe there would be someone she could talk to about their shared experiences. So I had all these things that I could do following my meeting with Eddie. And eventually I found the time to call Kurt Goldberger. I wanted it to be a day when I wasn't working, when I could take notes and really be focused. And I also had to take in a 3-hour time difference to New York into account. And so I finally called him, and a woman answered the phone. And I said, hello, can I please speak to Kurt Goldberger? And she said, yes, can I ask who's calling? And I said, my name is Debbie Oppenheimer. And she said, I know exactly who you are. I lived at Hackney Hostel in Cockley Clay with your mother. And so the application had gone to their post office box They had seen what I had written. She had been working on a letter to me, but she had not yet mailed it. And so she opened a treasure trove of introductions to people and information and old artifacts, so that now I do know quite a bit about my mother. So that was the start. Things just kept unfolding. Like there's a word called beshert, which means meant to be. And I did conclude that I was meant to make this movie. So my mother's experience, as I came to learn it, informed a great deal of Into the Arms of Strangers. But except for a couple of photos, my mother is not in Into the Arms of Strangers. So the reason Bertha created this reunion and decided to have it was because she looked at her 14-year-old son and she thought that was the age she was when she went on the Kindertransport, and her story was going to slip away. People didn't know what happened to her. And so she decided to create this reunion. She was this little older woman. She had no experience or expertise of doing this. And 1,000 people showed up in London at that first reunion, parents, grandparents, grandchildren, and it was very important for all of them. Parents started speaking to children, grandparents to grandchildren, and it opened up something that had not happened before. And one of the reasons for that was because the Kindertransport survivors had a modesty about their experience. They did not go through the concentration camps. Many of their family members or people they knew or people they grew up with had gone through the camps. And so they felt that although their childhood was greatly compromised and irrevocably altered, they did not suffer in the way of the other survivors. And so they did not speak about it. I can tell you that Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Yad Vashem, the big Holocaust museum in Israel, do all view Kindertransport survivors, Kindertransport people as survivors, as do I. I had never made a documentary before. I was a producer, as Ms. Poland said. I worked on shows like Drew Carey and George Lopez and Wanda Sykes and hundreds and hundreds of episodes of television, but I hadn't made a documentary, which is very different. And I wanted people to know what the Kindertransport was. And I wanted people to know what I had not known. So I didn't know where to begin. I think that when you're so passionate and so moved and motivated by something, the heavens start opening up and you are led on a path. And I do believe that's what happened for me. And people would speak to me as I started tapping into this network of survivors. I think they heard my name, Oppenheimer, which is a very German name. I told them from the start, my mother would not speak about her experience, and they understood the pain of that and why she made that choice. By that time, they were facing their mortality. They were older, and they wanted to leave a legacy. Like Bertha Leverton, they were worried their stories would be lost. They wanted to honor their parents, and they wanted to give thanks to England and to the people who took them in. And finally, they wanted to prove their lives worthy of having been saved. In many cases, the survivors in our film had never told their stories. We're asked very often, how did we choose the stories that are in the film? And we always say that there were 10,000 people rescued by the Kindertransport, therefore there are 10,000 stories. And obviously we could not tell all those stories. So we tried to tell of good experiences and of not good experiences, of people who never saw their parents again, and of somebody who was fortunate to be reunited, of siblings who remained together and siblings who were separated, a foster mother who took a child in who could talk about that experience, a mother who sent her child away who lived to be reunited with her. and the rescuers. And the rescuers in our film, Norbert Wollheim and Nicholas Winton, were among the last of the rescuers. And in fact, Norbert Wollheim passed away 5 weeks after we interviewed him. Everybody kept saying to us, you have to hurry, you have to hurry. He's not well. And even his wife said that to us. We did the interview. He was great. He was in the peak of health and told his story very well. And when we learned that he passed away, which I suffered as a tremendous loss, it was very painful to me. His wife said that he rallied himself for one last testimony, and having accomplished it, he felt sufficiently at peace to let go. We also found Lori Kahn, who you saw in the movie, whose father pulled her out of the train. We were stunned to find her and so shocked that we weren't sure her story was true. How could that be possible? She was pulled out of the train. She did weigh, I think, 59 pounds after going through multiple concentration camps. And what we did not have the time to tell in the movie is that her father survived, and she did get to be reunited with him, and she never asked him about pulling her out of the train. She never talked to him about it. We started making the film gradually. I surrounded myself with the best people working in documentaries, a great editor named Kate Amand, a great director named Mark Jonathan Harris. We started out, and as I said, we were able to capture Norbert's interview. We also interviewed a 100-year-old mother. She did not make it into the film. Unfortunately, we were not able to include everybody. And then on the same day we learned that Norbert died, our financier, our funder, did not go through with it and pulled out of the movie. And we completely collapsed. I was in the middle of, I think, 4 TV shows and did not have the time or the ability or the knowledge of how to go around raising money or trying to sell the film. And thankfully, Warner Brothers, where I was working, recognized that more stories would be lost. Barry Meyer was the chairman of the board at the time, and he was a remarkable person, a deep person, and a feeling person. And he used the success of Harry Potter and Batman and Friends and all these all these successful TV shows to give us the funding that we needed to move forward. We could not make the film today. Of the people who were in the film, only 2 are still alive. When we set out to make the film, in addition to wanting people to know about the Kindertransport, we wanted to ask the question, would you take in a child? And would you send your child away? I don't necessarily believe that those are answerable questions. And we asked each of the survivors in the film, and none of them would even take a shot at answering the question of would they send their child away, because they thought the magnitude of it is too great. How could they possibly put themselves in their parents' shoes and understand what it was like to live in Nazi-occupied territories? But we hope that people would leave the theater or finish watching the movie and ponder that question, ask that question of themselves, and maybe discuss it. We also wanted to talk about, well, what did they take? If it were you, any of you, and you were going away to an unknown land where you had never been, where you did not speak the language, to people you didn't know, for a length of time that you were unsure of, what would you take? And then when I met up with you 60 years later, what would you have saved? And here's a video clip we made about the answer to that question.
The opening of the film, we're trying to evoke this period through objects that children had and took with them from Germany and Austria.
We're doing this packing sequence with the objects. There are no photographs or footage of anybody packing, so we decided to contact a lot of the survivors who we've gotten to know in the time that we've made the film, to ask them what they brought and what they still have today. And we came up with just a very powerful, extraordinary, eclectic assortment of objects that their parents thought to pack for them 60 years ago that they then chose to hang on to for all this time. So the objects are very moving, very emotional. A teddy bear, a wooden train set, a car set with the tracks and the little objects that you use to put around it to create the setting. Pencils, pencil sharpener, crayons, watercolors, posy books, which are like autograph books that you would take into the school, and all your friends would sign it and write inscriptions, and you would put little stamps and little drawings, and it's a very, very personal little book. A boy at the age of 9 was given a pocket watch by his father, who knew that he might not see his bar mitzvah, which would occur when he was 13. We have a little satin case, and when you open it up, there are collars and embroidered linens. Everything is embroidered. All the children have written their names inside in their own hand. We even have labels that the parents would hand sew into the back of the clothing so that the clothing wouldn't be misplaced or confused with another child's clothing, and the remaining package of the labels for when the child grew and bought new clothing and would need new labels sewn into it. Would you choose to put in your child's suitcase when you were limited to how much they could pack? This belonged to my mother. This was her 11th birthday present given to her just before she went on the train. It's a Mont Blanc pen and pencil set, and she had written her name inside the cover here, and then stamped on the pen. This is the only thing she really had of her childhood. It's a museum collection of objects, and the idea that people would put their most precious possessions that you can't put a value on into a FedEx box and ship it to us is such an act of trust that we're so grateful for. I think it's extraordinary, but I think that the survivors view themselves very modestly. They don't use the word survivor to describe themselves. They're very sensitive about the idea that they did not have to go through concentration camps. They did not suffer that fate. They lived. And I think the idea of honoring their parents and honoring the people who took them in and honoring England who had opened their doors to them and taken these children was very important to them, and that's why they would participate, and that's why they would loan us their objects. I find it to be very moving and very powerful and extremely inspirational. I'm very inspired by these people.
So this is my mother's pen and pencil set, which you saw. Ooh, that was the eraser. This is one thing that I have of hers. And what happens is these things take on more value than diamonds or gold bullion or something. Here's another thing that was not in that clip. This was a shoe tree of hers. I guess back in that time, they would keep the shape of their shoe, and stamped on this is, whoops, I'm not good at this, is my mother's birthplace. So those are just a couple of the things I have. I don't have much of hers. There's a great deal that's come about as a result of this film. As Ms. Poland told you, we did win the Oscar, and I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud to have that at the occasion, Samuel Jackson read our name, and 1 billion viewers in 150 countries were able to hear the word kindertransport.
That's awesome.
And it also means that the word has passed somewhat into the language. I certainly don't expect that people have seen this movie. Maybe they don't even know about it, but I think it's less likely now. If you ask somebody about the kindertransport, maybe they would not say kidney transplant anymore. There is now an entry about the kindertransport in the Encyclopedia Judaica. It has gone through a revision. We were invited by the editor to contribute to that entry. We wrote a companion book. So there's a companion book that has the same artwork as the movie. It has the same name as the movie, and it was published by the original Harry Potter publishers in England, Bloomsbury Press. There were reunions. People found each other through the film. People recognized each other and reached out and got back together again. We had premieres all over the world. Also during this time, I started doing volunteer work, and I volunteered at the local public school, and I met a little boy there who was 6 years old at the time. I was volunteering and working with each of the students at their desks, and I would be rotated around. And I was particularly struck by this one boy, Patrick, who just had this huge smile and was really positive. And when I finally had to go back to work and couldn't do the volunteer work anymore, as I was walking out the door, I asked one of the teachers to tell me a little bit about Patrick. The kids were all out on the playground, and they told me that Patrick was living in an orphanage and that he had been removed from his parents' care. And I didn't know that there were still orphanages. I had not encountered foster care before or the child protective system. And I went home sobbing, and I resolved to stay with Patrick and to continue to see him, to read him books, and to pay attention to him, which I thought were both things that would be helpful to him and to me. And so it's been 27 years now. Patrick is now 33 years old, and maybe Miss Poland can show pictures of Patrick and me together.
Stop. Hold on a moment. There we go. There we go. Can you not see my screen yet?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on one moment. I'm going to go again. Had a little problem there. There we go.
Here we are.
There we are.
That's Patrick and I celebrated Christmas together at somebody's house, and that's Patrick and me in front of Drew Carey's Jeep at the time, where we filmed the Drew Carey show. And then that was us together way more recently. And I think one last thing I can show you before we move to questions and answers was a particularly happy occasion for the film and its survivors. Although the parents had to make this impossible decision to send their children away as unaccompanied minors, the survivors were very grateful to Great Britain for taking them in. And here is an occasion that recognizes that.
Gratifying. They're great fun, and 14 of them are here tonight. I've come all the way from New Zealand to see my wrinkled face on the screen.
Great Britain was the only country willing to open its doors. There was no other nation willing to take in the children. By being here tonight, he honors the 10,000 children and their parents and the people who did so much to save them.
Well, I came from New Jersey, America. I didn't realize that I was going to get 15 minutes worth of fame.
It's wonderful to meet so many of them over the years, and it is really, I'm very, very happy to be here tonight.
You see the resilience of children and the humanity of these survivors and the humanity of the British who were able to take them in is also very inspiring.
For me, it's a lovely occasion because I've come to see my sister who's come all the way from New Zealand.
We just searched the world. We have a woman here from Israel. We have people from the United States, people from various parts of Britain. One of our rescuers is 92 years old. One of our surviving mothers who's in the film is 95 years old. So the people who we were able to find are quite extraordinary and very rare.
You know, this is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. It's certainly something I wouldn't want to miss. And also, I like to see my foster brother as often as possible. He lives in London, and I live in New York. It's a ways.
I always liked London. It's a little mystical.
To see about a dozen of us there is just great. We know we have this in common, and there's this bond between us.
I think it's a most wonderful film. I am really honored to be here.
It's quite important that people know what happened and how good England was to take us in.
It was a sort of horrible time and magical time because without the kindness of others, we certainly wouldn't be here.
So I'm sure you all recognized him. I realize we never say his name in that clip. That was Prince Charles, next in line for the throne, the father of Prince Harry and Prince William. And we were very honored that he could come and meet with all the people in the film. It's very unusual to get a royal premiere like that. So we were very appreciative to Prince Charles. So I think we can do questions now if you'd like. And
Terrific. Well, Ms. Oppenheimer, I can't thank you enough for giving us your time, and what an incredible story for the birth of this film. And I as you were speaking, and I missed the German word, but as you were speaking, I was thinking, wow, this was meant to be. This was meant to be, and we certainly believe that. We believe that there are things that are just so important that, and I agree with you. When passion gets involved and things are meant to be, then wonderful things can happen. And we've all been educated as a result of this film. So I thank you for that. So I know the students have worked to come up with some questions for you. So we'll go in order alphabetically by school. So Mr. Williams at St. Andrew, maybe you guys would like to start with one of your questions. And you're muted, Mr. Williams. There we go.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Celeste, and my question is, what person did you find the most interesting to interview?
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand what you said.
Hello, my name is Celeste, and my question is, what person did you find the most interesting to interview?
Hi, Celeste. Thanks for that question. I fell in love with everybody in this movie. They're sort of like children. You can't pick favorites, but there were some people who really touched my heart. When we interviewed Alex Gordon, who is at the end of the movie, who says I was meant to survive, that was one of the few interviews where I cried. During the interview, Norbert Wollheim, the rescuer, he rescued thousands of children, and he was not able to save his own son. He and his wife and son were deported, and at the selection, his wife and son went in one direction, he went in the other, and he never saw them again. So he certainly touched my heart. And then there were quite a few others. The woman whose 8th birthday party nobody came to, I stayed. There were a lot of them who I stayed in touch with throughout their lives, and even among the 2 who are still alive, I'm in touch with them to a degree. So It's a hard question to answer, but it's a good question because I did care deeply about them.
Thanks, Celeste. Great question. At St. Anne Academy, Miss LaCarrie. And you're muted. So.
Hello, Hello, Miss Oppenheimer. My name is Barbara Poland, and my question is, do you feel that the events of the Holocaust bring more awareness to social injustice in the world? And if so, is it enough to cause people to do something about it?
Fantastic question. Your question makes me cry. Yes, I think among the very important things to come out of the Holocaust is the delineation between a perpetrator, the people who worked in the concentration camps, the people who beat and arrested people and destroyed businesses, but there's also the experience of being a bystander, to be a witness, to see what happens and to do something, to say something. And I think that that's vitally, vitally important for all of us to know. And it certainly guides me in some of my conduct. And I think that, unfortunately, there's a phrase, never again, connected to the Holocaust, but sadly, that's not the case. And again, there are more genocides, more tragedies, more injustices. And so I think to work and to give on a level that you feel comfortable with would be something wonderful to come out of whatever it is that you see that touches your heart or that awakens you to contribute and to participate.
Great question, St. Anne Academy. All right, St. Augustine Academy, let's go with Miss Hyder's class.
Hello, Ms. Oppenheimer. My name is Richard, and my question for you is, if you could go back in time and ask your mother anything about her experience with the gender transport, what would it be?
I've never been asked that question.
Wow.
That's a fantastic, I've done a lot of
It's a great question.
and nobody's ever asked me that. And that's a great question. I would say that there's a catch-22. If my mother had not died, I would not have made this film. But of course, I would have preferred that my mother had lived. There's so much I would have wanted to ask her. I would have wanted to ask her about her parents. I would have wanted to ask her about her childhood. I don't think my mother ever fully got over losing that fundamental love, that unquestioning love at such an early age. And so I would have wanted to know her story. I would have wanted her to tell me her story. And another reason why I love your question is because one of the things I hope some of you take away from this movie is to ask your loved ones their stories. There's so many people who don't talk about what happened to them, whether they were veterans who served in the military or whether they experienced something difficult or challenging or painful. And if to the degree that you can ask them their stories and have them be willing to tell you, I hope you would do that so that you would know their stories in a way that I didn't get to know my mother's. And it's hard. It's not an easy thing to do. My father lived almost 30 years longer than my mother, and not quite, maybe 25 years. And even with him, I would ask him questions. I knew a lot more about him, but it's hard to figure out the questions to ask. But I would urge you to do that.
Great question, Richard. And Ms. Lee's class at St. Augustine.
Hi, my name is Mindy. My question is, what emotional impact did working on a documentary like this have on you and your colleagues? Did any of your colleagues also have a personal connection to the Holocaust or kinder transport?
Listen, you're all coming up with great
questions.
questions that have not been asked before. So one of my colleagues did have an experience. Her father had escaped Germany. Her mother was Catholic and German and married her father. So they both had come from Germany. I think that mostly the other people on the film were definitely not all Jewish, and they did not have a personal connection in the way of having a family member survive it, but they all found their way in different ways. They all responded to the material. For me, getting to wake up each morning feeling like my life had purpose and getting to work on something that I thought was important was a gift. And you don't always get to do that in your life. And I've gotten to do that a couple of times. And that's fantastic when you can mix the work with the purpose. For me, getting to feel so deeply, it was painful, but I liked digging down so deeply and feeling so deeply. Our survivors were funny sometimes too, and they sometimes made me laugh. But it was very emotional, but in a great way.
Thank you. Great question. You're okay with a couple more?
Yeah.
Terrific. We'll go back to St. Andrew Academy, Mr. Williams.
Hello again, and the next question is, what part of making this documentary did you find the most rewarding?
Well, I think what was most rewarding to me was getting to know these people and giving them an opportunity to tell their stories and getting to learn their stories. When the Oscars came around, there's a lot of hoopla, and you're caught up with what do you wear and what does your hair look like and how's your makeup and all kinds of things like that. And it was important to me to remember what the origins of everything that led up to that were. And so on the day of the Oscars, I went into my bedroom and I pulled out one of the binders of the transcripts of the movie, and I flipped to the pages of Norbert Wollheim, the man who I told you died after 5 weeks. So I think getting to hear his story and getting to tell his story, because the stories have lived on after these people have passed away for their children and their grandchildren, and grandchildren who were much younger at the time are now old enough to appreciate it. And there have been times where I even speak with the daughter of one of the survivors to a class. So I would say that. I do have something I wanted to show you, speaking of the Oscars, which maybe you have not seen.
Ooh.
I get to have this in my house. I had never seen one before. I had never held one
It's
before.
incredible.
It weighs 10 pounds.
Does it?
It's heavy.
All right.
It's not on display for everybody to see. I don't even really notice it, but I feel it. I feel that I accomplished that.
Incredible. Incredible. St. Anne Academy again.
Hello. The speakers in the documentary spoke about using the experiences of their past to help create a better future for themselves and others. In addition to what they spoke about in the documentary, what are some things they hope for by speaking out and sharing their experiences?
Another excellent question. I think that it was important to them to try as best as they could to not have something like, to be witnesses, so to put a living face on this story so that they could make it more real. It's very hard to wrap your arms around 6 million people killed. So here they were, living witnesses, and they gave back in different ways. Some people spoke in classes, some people spoke in institutions like museums, or to groups. Some of them focused on raising children and grandchildren as best they could, and imparting their wisdom. And they were very troubled when they would see anything that evoked the fears of what had happened to them and what had happened before. One of the things that I wanted to tell all of you, to try to give this some dimension, is that there were 1.5 million children killed in the concentration camps. There were 10,000 children rescued by the Kindertransport. So 1.5 million, 10,000. Of the 10,000, 2 went on to win the Nobel Prize. And so when you think about those numbers and what we'll never know,
what was lost,
it's quite enormous to think about.
I didn't realize 2 Nobel Prize winners of the survivors. That's incredible. And that is, of course, the tragedy, that what potential we'll never know, that the world will never benefit from. Oh my goodness. Ms. Heider's class.
Hello, my name is Justin, and my question for you is, why do you think so many ordinary people contributed to the genocide of their Jewish neighbors?
Gosh, you guys are amazing. You must come from wonderful families and are getting a great education, because these are really powerful, fantastic, probing questions. I think, unfortunately, people stopped seeing other people as people. I think that they may have been very regular neighbors, classmates from the Hitler Youth. There were several years that they could grow up to be young adults. And I think they no longer recognize Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and the other people who were people who spoke up for others. All the people who were the victims of this, I think they stopped seeing them as human beings, because otherwise I don't understand how people could do this to other people.
Great question, Justin. Thank you.
But I think it's important not to think that they are a monster. They are, I mean, what they did was awful, but some of these people were very regular, ordinary people. And it goes back to the earlier question, where sometimes they were just bystanders, and they were fearful, and they had other reasons for not speaking out and coming forward. There were so many reasons why this happened.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we have a tendency sometimes to want to villainize and say, well, you know, this happened because that person was a monster. It's really important that we recognize that they were human, because those flaws are in humanity. And so we have to really be vigilant against those things. It's easy to say something's a monster, and it makes it feel make-believe. We have to recognize that has a real possibility of existing, as Ms. Oppenheimer said, still happens now. And it doesn't mean that those people aren't human. It means that that's a flaw that we have to really be vigilant against. So that was a really great question, Justin.
The question is so great that the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum agrees with you and is in the process of completely reconceiving their permanent exhibition to ask that question and to inform people of how it happened. The museum was started 25 plus years ago, and things were different at that time, and it's time for rethinking. And so they are embarked on a multi-year campaign to change and update the permanent exhibition to address that question and to try to begin to probe it.
That's incredible. And I know we're running out of time. I want to be respectful of your time, and I'll just let Ms. Lee's class get their last question in, and then we'll wrap up and say our goodbyes.
My name is Justin, and what advice would you give to aspiring documentary filmmakers and producers?
Great question.
Ah, good question. I would say take note of what you're watching, to see what you like about it. If there's I even recommend to people to make Excel sheets and to keep track of, what did you see? Did you like it? Did you like the costumes? Did you like a particular actor? Was there something in how it was filmed, in the music, in the production designer? And begin to create your own database of what works for you. I would say try, if you're going to enter the business, to try to think about, well, what type of projects would you like to work on? And then, or even the producers of projects that you admire, and try to work with those people. And I would say practice. And all the people I came up through the ranks were very willing to work very hard and to do whatever it takes. And I would always say to people, Xerox the page straight, because if you don't, you won't get the opportunity to do the next task and the next task and take on more responsibility. People like to promote from within. So if you could try to get in somewhere in the sphere, if you like dramas, try not to go into comedy. If you like soap operas, don't go into game shows or reality shows. And I think that the great thing about the entertainment industry is you can come from anywhere. It's not like a lawyer where you need to have a law degree. You can come from any background, and treat looking for a job like a job. It's a job to look for a job. And the entertainment industry is tough, but you have to be persistent and keep trying, and maybe eventually you'll get your foot in the door.
That's great. Great advice. Thank you. Well, again, we're just about at the end of our time, actually. We're just a few minutes over. So, Ms. Oppenheimer, I want to thank you again. What a joy to connect with you and to reconnect with you. For me, we met a very, very long time ago. And so it's a joy to have reconnected with you. And thank you. And if you guys want to unmute your screens, I'll let you all say goodbye. And again, thank you very much. I know that the students really appreciated the opportunity to see your film, and thank you for contributing to our education, and that we will keep this project and you and all of the people involved with it in our prayers. And I think, can we all agree that we will make a commitment to allow this to bloom in our hearts, and think about the ways that we can not be bystanders when we see injustice happen in our worlds, right? Can we agree with that?
Yes. Yes.
All right. Can you guys say goodbye?
If you have any additional questions. Bye. Thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure and a treat to speak to you today. And your questions are spectacular. And I have such high hopes for you. If there are other questions you have, you can send them to Ms. Poland, and I'll be happy to answer them. And good luck to all of you. Thank you so much. It's early in my day here in California, and you've made my day, my week, my month. Thank you so much.
Take care. God bless. And bye, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.